They say no trail shows up on a map by accident. But the Black Hollow Trail didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was waiting. You're listening to ASMR 404 Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It started with the map I found taped to the inside of a bathroom stall at a rundown gas station near the border of West Virginia and Kentucky. It was soaked in dried mildew at the corners, but the ink looked freshly drawn, almost intentional trails. Burr marked in red ink, like veins through the forest, with one bold name etched across the top in block letters. Black Hollow Trail. It wasn't on Google Maps. It wasn't listed in any official registry I could find, and that's what pulled me in harder than anything else could have an unlisted trail in the Appalachian backcountry, where no hiker dared to pin their GPS logs. That's the kind of mystery that keeps my boots dusty and my pack loaded. I drove out toward the trailhead after work with a canteen of strong coffee and a pack full of camera gear. My plan was to hike the full circuit if I could find it, take some shots, and maybe even camp the night, if the area felt safe enough. But the closer I got, the worse my phone signal became, until I was surrounded by nothing but radio static and tree-covered hills, swallowing the horizon. The parking area wasn't marked. There was no wooden post, no gravel lot, just a shallow ditch off a dirt road and a rusted chain draped across a narrow clearing with a faded sign hanging from it that read "Keep Out" in letters so weathered they looked like scars. There was something off about the air as soon as I stepped out of the car. The wind didn't blow in gusts. It moved in slow, deliberate spirals brushing past my ears, like something breathing behind me. I told myself it was nerves or elevation, or maybe just an overactive imagination, but I still hesitated before unhooking the chain and stepping onto the narrow footpath. Beyond, the trees were thick black birches, twisted like arthritic fingers, reaching over the trail to blot out the afternoon. Sky moss hung like wet laundry from the branches, and the dirt path had been trodden into soft mud with boot prints far too large and deep to be casual. I walked in silence for nearly 2 hours, the only sound coming from my own steps and the slow grind of my breath. The deeper I went, the more wrong the forest felt, like it was folding in on itself, narrowing with each mile until I was squeezing through gaps in the undergrowth and ducking beneath branches that seemed to grow lower with every step. The trail dipped sharply into a ravine where a stream once ran, but it was dry now, nothing but cracked stone and dead frogs fossilized into the banks. I crouched to take a photo, and that's when I heard it, the sound of something big moving through the brush behind me, not clumsy like a bear or deer, but deliberate, like it knew I had stopped and was waiting for me to move again. You didn't turn around. I just stood slowly and continued walking, pretending I hadn't noticed, but my shoulders were tense and my hands were slick with sweat on the camera grip. I could hear it pacing me for nearly another mile, just far enough back to stay hidden, but close enough that I could hear the low wheeze of breath matching my own. The trail finally opened into a clearing where a large tree had fallen across a pool of shallow water, reflecting the gray sky above. I used The break to rest, crouching low to splash water on my face when I saw it in the reflection, something standing at the edge of the woods behind me, tall and motionless. Not a bear, not a man, not anything I could name it. Vanished when I spun around, but the ripple it left in the water didn't lie. That night I set up camp in the hollow near the old pool. I hadn't seen any birds or bugs or even squirrels since entering the trail, and the silence was beginning to press against my skull like a migraine. I boiled some coffee over a small fire and tried to write down my thoughts, but the words wouldn't come. It was like the trees were listening, and every time I formed a sentence, something shifted just out of sight, erasing the thought. Before I could make it stick, I tried to sleep early, wrapped tight in my bag, but I never truly fell under instead. I drifted in a state of half-conscious dread, listening to the wind whisper phrases I couldn't quite translate until something heavy snapped a branch just outside my tent. I froze, breath caught in my throat, listening as it circled, slow, methodical, dragging something heavy through the wet leaves. I reached for the knife tucked near my hip, but my fingers wouldn't close around it. I was shaking too hard. Then the zipper began to slide downward, not fast, not loud, just a steady creeping sound, like someone peeling skin from a wound. I didn't scream, I didn't breathe, I just shut my eyes tight and prayed to whatever God still bothered to watch over fools like me. And when I opened them again, the zipper was closed, and the fire had gone out, and something had left a handprint in the condensation on the inside of my tent. A hand too long and narrow, with fingers that curled like claws at first light. I packed up without eating and backtracked toward where I thought the entrance had been, but nothing looked the same. The trees were wrong, older somehow. The trail wound in circles that doubled back on themselves, and the daylight never seemed to rise above a dull haze that made my watch spin like it was caught in a magnetic field. Hours passed, days maybe. I couldn't tell anymore, and my rations were running low. I kept hearing voices just ahead of me, gentle, cogent, like a mother calling a child. But when I reached the source, I only found piles of shredded clothing hanging from the trees, like ornaments. Eventually, I stumbled into what must have been an old ranger station deep in the woods. The structure was half collapsed, but the roof still held in places, and there was a rotted desk inside with a waterlogged map nailed to the wall. Black hollow. Trail was printed in black with dozens of tiny red X's along the path, each one labeled with initials, by, and dates, most recent, from just 3 months before. I ran my fingers over the closest mark and felt the wood splinter beneath my touch, like it had been burned from the inside out. I spent the night in the station, but I didn't sleep. Something was outside again, watching, pacing, whispering my name in a voice that mimicked my mother's, my sister's, my own. I held the knife in my lap and carved symbols into the wall just to hear something louder than the breathing outside. I must have drifted, because when I woke up the fire was ash, and someone had written a message in soot across the inside of the wall beneath my carvings. It said, "You are the next X." And I could smell something cooking outside, like meat, like hair, like my own. Fear boiling out of my skin. I don't know how I made it out. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm still there, walking loops around the same dead tree while something wears my face and posts My photos online telling my friends I'm fine, that I just needed break. Maybe I left my body behind on the trail, and what's writing this now is just a shadow, with fingers that mimic my keystrokes, but don't really understand what words mean. Maybe you'll find this too, maybe. You already have unmade. Maybe the trail's waiting for you next. I left the ranger station before the sun could rise again. If it ever had, maybe there was no sun in black. Hollow, maybe it was just the illusion of time cast by a memory of warmth. But I couldn't stay there, not with that voice scratching at the door, not with that soot still fresh and shifting, as though it were breathing along the walls. I tightened my boots, checked my blade, and followed the faintest path leading west, hoping it would lead to water or to an exit, or at least away from the thing that called itself my mother. The trees grew closer, the branches lower. They moved when I wasn't looking. They weren't rooted, not fully. I started catching glimpses of them, twitching their limbs and adjusting positions, like mannequins being posed for a crime scene. Their bark peeled like skin, showing black rot underneath, and there were symbols carved into nearly every trunk. Symbols I didn't recognize, not runes, not glyphs, not anything human. They pulsed faintly when I passed them. And sometimes, I swear, they shifted, rearranging themselves, like sentences in a nightmare that rewrites itself as you read by midday. I found the remnants of another camp. This one was far more recent. A backpack left zipped and upright beside a pile. Ash where a fire had been burnt out violently, as if stamped out. Mid-meal clothes folded neatly beside a sleeping bag that hadn't been unrolled. No blood, no signs of struggle, just silence and an air of abandonment that felt far too intentional. I opened the backpack, hoping for a map or a journal, but what I found were photos. Dozens of them printed on thick, glossy paper, each one of the same clearing from a slightly different angle each. One showing the same massive tree with something hanging from it, a shape that grew clearer as I flipped through the sequence. A person, a body, rotting eyes, stitched open, staring toward the skadar. Last photo was of me standing in that same clearing, the camera angle from behind, as if someone had been just a few feet away when they took it. I dropped the stack into the fire pit and ran. I don't remember for how long, maybe an hour, maybe 10. I ran until my lungs screamed and my throat was raw, and when I stopped, I was in the clearing from the photos, and the tree was still there, and something was still hanging from it. It was me, or it looked like me, same boots, same jacket, same pack, same dead eyes, wide and stitched and full of flies. I tried to scream, but the sound died in my chest. Like it hit a wall, my mouth opened, but only wind came out, and the wind laughed. The branches rattled like teeth, and something whispered again, but this time it didn't try to mimic someone I loved. This time it used my voice, calling me weak, calling me stupid, calling me food. I stumbled away, not running now, but crawling, dragging myself along the forest floor until I found the stream again. Only now it was full black as tar, and moving in reverse, flowing up rocks and curling backward toward the mountain. I cupped some in my hands, hoping to test if it was just muddy water. But when I lifted it to my face, it didn't drip. It climbed my wrists, instead sliding up like oil, slick tendrils trying to find a way in. I screamed. then, or tried to. And the stream echoed me perfectly, but it didn't sound like a copy. It sounded like something wearing my throat on the inside. Like it had already found its way through night, came faster now, too fast. Like the sun was yanked down on a string, and I was left choking in its absence. I made shelter under a rotted root system and tried to cover myself with leaves, but the ground was too soft. It gave under me like breathing mud, and I kept seeing shapes in the dark, tall and thin, with eyes that blinked sideways and too many fingers sometimes. I'd sleep for seconds, just seconds, and wake up somewhere new. Inside a hollow log, or hanging upside down from vines, or knee-deep in icy water, without remembering. How I got there, the forest played with me like a cat toys with its kill, and each time it let me go I felt a little less like myself. Found a journal, eventually, half buried beneath a pile of bones and rusted gear. It was old, the cover cracked and stained, but the words inside were still legible. At first, they were hopeful entries from a man named Dr. Kellen Reed, a professor from Ohio State, researching regional Appalachian folklore. But as the pages went on, the words, lost-shape sentences bled into each other, and his name started changing, first to Kelly, then to Kel, then just symbols and shapes drawn in blood. Near the final page, the handwriting was replaced entirely by a different script, almost serpentine in form, like something ancient had taken the pen from him and started writing through his fingers. The last page was blank until I touched it. Then words appeared like rising bruises, reading, "I'm still here, I'm just underneath." And the page pulsed once like a heartbeat before the ink ran upward off the paper and into the air. I don't remember sleeping, but I must have, because when I opened my eyes, I was back at the trailhead, or what looked like it, but everything was wrong. The trees were still blackened, the sky was a dull bruise, and my car was covered in moss, like it had been parked there for years. I rushed to it anyway, yanked the door open, and found the driver's seat, occupied by myself, slumped over with eyes wide and mouth full of dirt. I backed away, fell to my knees and screamed, but no sound came, just that wind again pushing through my teeth, whispering, "Welcome back, welcome home." I walked away after that, not toward any direction in particular, just away, and the forest kept folding around me until I ended up here again at another camp. At another clearing where I found this broken laptop buried under a pile of leaves and bone, and something told me it would work. Just long enough to type this, just long enough to finish the warning someone else started long before me. You find this, if you hear this, if you feel the itch to follow an unmarked trail because you think you're braver than the others, because you think the world still hides secrets worth chasing, remember this: there is a place in the woods where time folds, and memory becomes a lie, and something older than bones watches from behind the bark. And it does not want to be discovered. It wants to be fed, and it is always hungry. I don't know how long I wandered after that. Maybe days, maybe weeks, maybe forever, because time didn't tick anymore. It dripped like sap, thick and slow, and every drop burned when it touched my skin, like it wasn't time at all, but something bolder, something bitter. I lost count of the times I passed the same stump carved with the same words. Go back in what looked like blood but never dried, no matter how many times I passed it, no matter how many times I tried to scrub it clean with river water or tears or my own hands. Food was gone long ago, but I stopped feeling hunger because the trail fed me in other ways. It gave me visions like nightmares tattooed onto the inside of my skull. I saw myself sitting in classrooms, smiling, bliss in photos, hugging my sister holding coffee, laughing at nothing and every time I blinked, the images got darker, the smiles stretched wider, the eyes turned black. The laughter cracked into screams, and I realized those weren't memories, they were replacements, copies stitched together by something that wanted to be me or wear me or bury itself so deep. I'd forget what it felt like to be Humeni found a cave one morning, or what looked like a cave, but it breathed like a lung, and the moss growing along its mouth pulsed like a tongue, waiting for something to crawl inside. It wasn't on any map, not even the cursed one that led me here, but the moment I stood before it, I knew this was the heart of the trail, the thing everything fed. Be into and out of the place. The trees whispered about the place that carried my scent and shadow and name like a trophy, stepped inside. And the air was thicker than blood, and just as warm walls covered in symbols glowing faint blue like dying stars, carved deep and wide and wet to the touch. The ceiling opened to a shaft that seemed to rise forever, but never showed sky, only flickering shadows. Like something danced above, waiting for me to come further in. I walked slow, barefoot, now because the ground had taken my boots at some point, and I didn't notice until I felt the stone chewing at my soles deeper still, and the sounds began voices. First again familiar, but twisted. My father's laugh without his warmth. My best friend's voice, telling jokes in a tone that cracked like dry leaves, and then other sounds too wet to describe the slurp of something devouring itself. The slick hiss of flesh pulled too tight over bone, and music notes that didn't belong to any instrument known to man or beast, only to this cave, only to this trail, only to this nightmare at the end. I found the altar not made of stone or wood, but of flesh, stretched and pulsing like a wound that refused to close teeth, growing out of its corners like it had once eaten something holy and kept the bones for flavor. It was covered in names, carved so deep the letters bled, and mine was there not just once, but dozens of times, layered over and over in a spiral that ended at the center of the altar where something waited, eyes closed, mouth open, arms too long to be human, wrapped around something small and squirming it. Spoke without sound, pressing its thoughts into my skull like hot wire, asking me questions I couldn't understand and offering answers. I hadn't asked for things like the trail was older than time, carved by something that fled the stars and found home in hunger, or that the people who vanished here didn't die. They were changed, turned into pieces of the forest, into the wind, into the soil, into the trail itself, and that now I had a choice, join or run, but running meant bringing it with May. Didn't answer, not with words, but with a scream that tore my throat raw and made the cave ripple, and the thing smile, and the altar pulse, once like a heart finally finding its beat. I turned and ran back through the cave faster than I thought possible, with torn feet and shredded lungs, and the thing didn't follow because it didn't have to. It was already inside me now. In my blood, in my eyes, in the way my breath fogged the air, even in heat. I don't remember getting back to the surface, only that the trail was gone, replaced by ash and twisted stumps, like the forest had collapsed behind me. Or maybe I was never in a forest at all, maybe. It had always been inside the cave, inside my head, inside the map, inside the bathroom stall, where I found E.T. Stumbled out onto the highway, flagged down a trucker, and collapsed in the back seat. They say I was missing 490 for days, but to me it felt like no time, and all time folded over and bled through my dreams. I told them. I got lost. They didn't believe me, not fully, but what else could they write in the report hiker found after 3 months? No memory, sunburn, 2 hell shoes gone, hands covered in strange symbols, teeth missing hair, turned white documents in my wallet smeared with blood and ash and mud, like they'd been buried. They'd cleaned me up, gave me meds, sent me home, but the home wasn't mine anymore. Everything looked the same, but felt wrong. The angles of the furniture, the tone of my sister's voice, the rhythm of my own heart. It was too slow to steady, not like it used to be. I sleep in bursts, and every time I wake up, I hear the trees calling. Again, even when I'm in the city, even when there's no forest for miles. I hear them in the plumbing, in the wind, through the AC vents, in the rustle of trash bags outside my window, and sometimes when I walk past glass, I don't see myself, not really. I see something watching me from behind my reflection, something tall and smiling, and still wearing my face like a wet mask. I tried to burn the map, but it won't burn. I tried to shred it, but the pieces crawled back together. I buried it. Bin concrete, poured salt around it, recited verses from every holy book I could find, but it still finds its way back, taped to walls in public bathrooms, scratched into trees in parks, folded into jacket pockets. I didn't own, so I'm writing this now, not as a warning, because it's already too late if you're reading this. If you're feeling the itch, the trail is already watching you, but maybe this confession will buy me a little more time, maybe. The trail prefers fresh blood, and by telling my story, it'll look for someone new, maybe. It'll forget me just long enough for me to sleep through the night one more time. But if you ever see a trailhead without a name, if the map changes when you blink, if the trees move just slightly when you're not looking, if you hear your mother's voice calling from deep inside the woods, even though you buried her years ago, turn around, don't answer, don't walk forward, don't read the sign B, 'cause Black Hollow Trail is not a place, it's a hunger, and it's always waiting. I was 19 when I first heard about Dustpine Ridge, tucked into a crooked spine of backcountry wilderness between eastern Arizona and the New Mexico line. It wasn't on modern maps, only the old state ranger papers listed it, and even then, it dip horse labeled with caution markers in red, stamped over and over with one phrase, no overnight permits. I found those records in a library basement while doing some research for a backcountry survival elective, and even though the files were cracked with age and faded from sun exposure, the trail name practically screamed from the Dustpine Ridge. Was the kind of place that vanished from public interest. Because it was easier that way, the Forest Service quietly rerouted other nearby trails, fencing off the old ridge path decades ago. But still I kept digging, and every time I mentioned it to a local, they either got real quiet or said the same phrase, like they were reading from some unspoken script. You don't hike Dustpine unless you want to disappear so naturally. I did exactly the opposite. My cousin Marlowe was the only one dumb enough to go with me. He was 23, had a beat-up Subaru, and a permanent caffeine twitch from working graveyard dispatch shifts. He'd hiked with me before in Zion, and once up north in Glacier, but he said Dustpine gave him a bad gut feeling from the moment we plotted the course. Still, he brought his gear and a spare set of boots and a collapsible shovel, and when I asked why the shovel, he just shrugged and said, you never know what needs burying out. Here we started our hike on a Monday morning in mid-October. The air was thin and sharp, and the sky overhead held that kind of gray that makes the trees look two-dimensional. The trailhead was unmarked behind a rusted gate and a fire road overgrown with dead grass. It didn't feel right from the moment we stepped beyond it. Everything was quiet. No birds, no bugs, not even the low drone of wind through pine, and the ground felt soft, like it had been turned over recently. Not like soil, but like a grave. The first mile was just dense woods and switchbacks. The trees here were wrong tall and too narrow, leaning in at odd angles, like they were eavesdropping. We walked without speaking, and every so often we'd hear something up ahead, a short, high whistle, not from birds, not from anything natural, just a single piercing note, always in front of us, never behind, like it was leading us deeper. I asked Marlowe if he heard it, and he said yeah, but only with one ear, which made no sense until I realized I could only hear it in my left, like the sound was crawling sideways through the trees. We set camp near a clearing, about 3 hours in there was an old fire pit ringed with cracked stones and a few bits of melted metal embedded in the dirt, like someone had once tossed a whole pack into the flames. I didn't like it. Marlowe didn't either, but it was the flattest ground we'd seen, so we pitched tents and boiled water. Pretend the silence wasn't pressing in around us like a fist around our throats when we turned in for the night. I slept with one boot on and the shovel tucked near my bag, just in case I woke up sometime after 2, according to my watch, because something was whistling again, this time closer. It wasn't the same single note, it was mimicking a tune. This time, a broken melody, like someone trying to remember the sound of a lullaby. They never quite knew. I unzipped the tent slow, and the air outside was colder than it should have been. For October the fire had gone out, but the coals were still warm, and Marlowe's tent was open but empty. No boots, no flashlight, no sound, just that same goddamn tune, threading through the trees. Called his name, didn't yell, just whispered. Like something in me knew loud noises were a bad idea, and that's when I saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, facing the trees, completely still. No flashlight, no jacket, just the silhouette. of him frozen like a shadow caught in the wrong frame. I stepped toward him, but he didn't move, and when I got close enough to reach for his shoulder, he turned, and I swear to everything, I believe in it wasn't his face anymore. It looked like by his skin, but the eyes were too big, too far apart. The mouth smiled too wide, and the teeth were all the same length. It didn't speak, it just whistled, and then ran backward into the woods, faster than anything human. I chased it, I don't know why. Instinct, maybe panic, but I followed it into the trees, and every few feet it would stop and wait and whistle again before darting deeper until I lost the path entirely, and the sky overhead disappeared behind those black trees. Found Marlowe the next morning, curled in a dry creek bed, half covered in pine needles. He was pale, freezing, but alive. He didn't remember leaving his tent, didn't remember hearing the whistling, but he kept repeating one word over and over during sleep, like a prayer or a curse. They're hollow, they're hollow, they're hollowy. Tried to backtrack out of the forest, but the trail was gone, like the earth had erased it. Completely, even the GPS tracker on my phone spun in circles, no matter where I walked. We were looped, trapped. Every landmark we passed seemed to come again an hour later. A burned stump, a pair of snapped branches, a boot print that looked like mine but was facing the wrong way. We rationed what we had, but by the third night we were chewing pine bark and drinking melted snow, and Marlowe's eyes had changed, no longer brown, more like gray now, and wide and searching the sky, like he was waiting for something to fall out of it. That night I woke to him standing at the edge of camp, again, not moving, not blinking, just whistling. And when I grabbed his shoulder this time, he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, mumbling something in a tongue I didn't understand. Behind him in the trees, there were others, not men, not beasts, just shapes, thin and crooked, wearing bark like skin and smiling with too many teeth, whistling the same broken tune in perfect unison. I didn't sleep after that, just sat with my back to a tree, one hand wrapped tight around the collapsed fire starter, and the other clutching the last flare. The air was dense and wet and smelled like pine sap and rotting teeth, and the whistling never stopped, just looped in and out of the trees, echoing from places too far away to be real and too close to be safe. And every now and then I'd hear Marlowe shifting in his sleep, murmuring nonsense with the same broken tune slipping between teeth like a parasite wearing a songgat. Dawn, the forest looked thinner, but not in a way that made me feel relief, more like it had backed away, watching from a distance, like it knew. I was too awake, too tense to toy with, and I used that moment to haul Marlowe up, wrap his coat tighter, and start walking in whatever direction felt less cursed. But the ground didn't cooperate. The trees leaned where they hadn't leaned before, and roots moved slightly underfoot, just enough to make you question if you'd stepped wrong, or if the earth itself was nudging you off course about. Half a mile in, we found something we hadn't seen before, a cabin, small and falling apart, sunk halfway into the ridge like it had been dragged into the hillside and left to rot. There was no smoke, no sound, no signs of life, but there were handprints on the outer wall, dozens of them, smeared in charcoal or blood or both. arranged like something had been clawing to stay inside instead of out. I should have turned away right then, but I didn't because the forest was closing again behind us, and the sky overhead had begun to darken, and Marlowe kept whispering, "Cabin, cabin, safe, safe, cabin," like the word had rewired itself into his brain inside. The cabin was colder than the air outside the walls, covered in long-forgotten drawings and scribbles in both charcoal and something. Shinier symbols that made my stomach twist when I looked at them too long, and a journal on a table cracked open and stuck to pull the surface with something dry and red. I peeled it loose, and the writing inside was frantic, hundreds of pages, written by someone named Eli Bright, a forest technician stationed here before. Dustpine was removed from state maps. The journal entries started normal cataloging trees, weather patterns, foot traffic, then a mention of whistling, just a passing line. At first, then more frequent reports, things. Missing round camp sounds in the night, distorted voices calling from the woods, things watching from behind the bark, but never stepping into light. He wrote about a boy who went missing from a nearby scouting group, who returned weeks later, hollow-eyed and mute, and whistling the exact same tune I'd been hearing for days. The last dozen pages were smeared with blood and graphite scrawled in slanted loops that broke grammar and reality, with words like "they're wearing our skin, and it's not the wind that howls, and dust don't settle here. It moves and moves and moves," and at the bottom of the final page he'd etched something with what looked like a nail or a blade. 3 crooked symbols that burned when I looked at them, and a sentence beneath in letters too deep to be erased. "If you hear them call your name, it's already too late." Marlowe stood frozen while I read, then pointed to the window and, "I swear to everything real," he said. "They're learning new songs now." And his mouth stretched into a grin that didn't fit his face, and he collapsed again, just like before, but colder this time, and whispering in a tongue that clicked and scraped instead of flowed. And I knew then that I couldn't carry him out, not because he was heavy, but because he wasn't Marlowe anymore. I left him there under a blanket with the flare between his fingers and the journal at his feet, and I closed the cabin door behind me, and I didn't cry until I was 100 yards away, because I knew if I cried while he could still hear me, he'd follow, and whatever was inside him would follow. That night I made a fire beneath an overhang of stone, and tried to pray, but the stars were gone, and the moon was wrong, shaped like an eye. Not a crescent, not a circle, just an eye, slit wide and looking down, and the forest began to hum, not whistling bellow anymore, but low, rhythmic droning like wind passing through bones, and I saw shapes at the edge of the trees, watching, crawling, sniffing the air, and one of them stood too tall and thin to be human, with limbs that bent backwards and a head that tilted far too far, and I realized it wasn't wearing bark, it was made of bark. And when it turned its face toward me, I saw my own face stitched into its chest like a trophy or a mascot. Through the last flare, and ran again, didn't stop until the trees changed color from black to gray, and the air smelled like dust and sun instead of rot and pine. And I found a river shallow and too straight to be natural, with stones stacked on either side like a path or a warning, and I followed it, hoping it would lead me back to something real, to pavement or a ranger station, or even a trail sign. But instead, I found more of them carved into the trunks like totems of mimicry, each with a different face. Stretched across it, some human, some animal, some unrecognizable, and all of them whistling in unison. I screamed for hours, and the river absorbed the sound and gave nothing back, and I sat with my knees in the dirt until I heard a voice calling from ahead, and it was my own voice, whistling my own tune, calling my own name. I didn't follow the voice, at first just stood there, ankle deep in a river that didn't move, staring ahead. Into a place the sky no longer touched. The trees beyond that bend weren't trees anymore, just shapes wrapped in bark and memory and mimicry, their branches twisted into fingers, their trunks split open like mouths waiting for names to fall in. I backed away, slow, step by step, dragging my breath through clenched teeth, because if I made too much sound, they'd know, they'd hear, they'd change again, and I didn't have the purport, strength to watch another one wear my face. But the forest doesn't need permission. Not here, not on Dustpine Ridge, where nothing sleeps and everything listens. And the moment I turned to run, the riverbed cracked beneath my feet, and something pulled me under, not into water but into silence, a hole. A pit, a mouth in the earth lined with roots and teeth and wet stone that pulsed like muscle. I fell for minutes, hours, lifetimes, and when I landed, I wasn't. Below, that was a hollow below the ridge wide, and living the air pulsing with hums and whistles and breath. The walls were lined with faces human and not strung like ornaments, stretched tight and whispering, broken songs over and over like lullabies. For the damned, and at the center of that hollow was the thing, the real one, the first one, the root of it. All it didn't have a shape, not one the brain wants to hold. It flickered like light through dirty glass. Its voice came from every direction at once, and it didn't speak with words but memory. It showed me things, my first step, my last dream. My mother's voice, my own face, split open to reveal a mouth that never stopped singing it. Offered me a place, a role in its choir, and behind that offer was the same thing that had driven every lost hiker into this hell hunger, not for food, but for identity, for shape, for echo. It didn't want to eat me, it wanted to use me, to wear me, to send me back, wrapped in my own skin, with its voice in my throat and its song in my lungs. I refused, or maybe I tried and failed. Or maybe I said yes, and this is what's left of the part that said no. I don't know. All I remember is screaming until my lungs gave out and waking up outside the hollow, back in the woods beneath a sun that didn't rise, just sat like a broken light bulb above trees that had lost their shadow's eye. Walked for days or hours or no time at all, and found a ranger station that shouldn't have been there. Its roof rusted in and windows boarded, but the door was open and the radio crackled with static, and I grabbed it and screamed until my throat bled, and someone answered, someone who called me by name and told me to sit still and wait, and that they were coming. And that I was safe now, but I knew better. They came in uniforms, bright with reflective tape and voices to calm. They found me wrapped in someone else's pack, with tags I didn't remember, and scars I didn't earn, And when they looked at me, looked too long like they saw something else just behind my eyes. They asked where I'd come from, and I said Dustpine Ridge, and the oldest one went pale and whispered a curse and marked something in a notebook and said that trail was closed years ago and that no one goes there. Not anymore, not after what happened to Bright or the scout troop or the two climbers who came out smiling and never stopped humming. They let me go. They always do, because that's the way it works. Once you've been inside, you carry it. And once you carry it, it never needs to follow you because it's already with you. Try not to whistle. I try not to dream. I try not to listen when the wind threads through the trees outside my apartment and sounds just a little too deliberate. And sometimes I see Marlowe in reflections, standing just behind me, not quite smiling, not quite frowning, just waiting. And sometimes I wake up humming, and I don't know the song. And sometimes the trail calls, again, not with maps, not with voices, but with absences, places I walk through that feel just a little too empty, like the air forgot how to echo, and I know it's near. So if you ever find a path that isn't on the map, if you hear music where there shouldn't be any, if you see a person standing just beyond the trees whistling a tune you almost recognize, do not follow, do not answer, do not whistle back.